folks, so today we're going to go over how to remove, inspect, and then reinstall wheel bearings. So this is going to be our sample. We just have it here attached to a vise on our bench. Here's some tools that we're going to need, though. We're going to need a chisel. We're going to need needle nose pliers, a ratchet, a hammer. We might need some vice grips, a punch, a half-inch ratchet perhaps, the correct socket, a breaker bar, and a torque wrench in order to reinstall the bearing with the proper torque. But the first thing we need to do is we need to take the brake caliper off here. So let's bring this back around to our side, and let's go ahead and take this off first and get it off our rotor. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is remove the brake caliper from the rotor. So we're looking at the back side of the rotor right now. And what we've got is right here the caliper, and then that's bolted to a bracket. Caliper here is bolted to a bracket here that attaches to our spindle here. What we need to do primarily is just take off our bracket, and we can leave the caliper attached to that. So you might need something like this. These are very tight on here, about 100, 120 foot-pounds sometimes. We're going to have to use either a long-handled ratchet or a breaker bar like this. I'm going to take this off. So go ahead and just put it on these right here. Loosen these up. Once they're loose, we use our ratchet to loosen these up the rest of the way. And then once we have this off, go ahead and set this whole assembly on the bench. Okay, now we're ready to take this off. The first thing we want to do is take off this is called our dust cap here. This is what keeps out all the oil and dirt and brake dust from getting inside into the bearings. And what we're going to use is a chisel like this with our ball peen hammer, and we want to get this right in between this lip right here and the side of the rotor. So just very lightly tap this, pushing your chisel from the outside in as you do this. Okay, just very lightly. And as it starts to come forward, go ahead and rotate this around to the other side and do the same thing very lightly. I have to go one more time. And one more time on this side. And that should be enough to get that loose and off. So there's, see, this is all full of grease in here. The next thing we want to do, we have something called the cotter pin in here, and this pin prevents this nut in here from coming loose. So what we have to do is bend the pin up on both sides. You have to find it in the midst of the grease. One side, bend both sides up. Grab the other side with a pair of needle nose pliers or some other type of plier, and you can pull it straight down to release the pin out of the spindle. It's also handy to have a rag because this is very greasy. Wear gloves. Okay, it is a very greasy job. You will get dirty doing this, but that's okay. That's why we're here, right? So go ahead. You're going to take this little cap off first. This little cap just fits on the top of this nut. Go ahead and take this off. Wipe it down. Get all the grease off. And then we're going to go ahead and take off the nut holding your bearing on. So this is going to be in our application, it's going to be about 1 1/16 inch. The socket's going to fit this nut here, so go ahead and put that on your ratchet and go ahead and loosen this. Once it's loose, you can just spin that nut off and make sure you keep all our parts together here on the bench. We don't want to lose any of these parts. Take the nut off. And then we also can bring this forward, and we're going to pull off the washer. that goes right up against our bearing here. Okay. And then we have our outside washer here. Now, usually this would be full of grease. This has been off and cleaned, and we haven't packed this yet. But you can see this is what it looks like. It's tapered. It goes from a larger diameter here to a smaller diameter on this end. And this is what fits inside of our rotor here. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that off. Now, the other thing we'd have is we have one bearing here on the outer part of the spindle, and we have another bearing on the inner part of the spindle. So we're going to pull off the inner one as well. So go ahead and pull out the outer one. One trick to getting the inner one off is because we have a seal on the inside too that holds in the grease on the inside of this. We're going to just put this nut on here just loosely, pull this forward slightly, and then just give it a nice tug. Almost. And as you can see, what it did, here's our outer bearing right here, and then here is our seal right here. It just kind of knocked that off all in one piece. And you have to kind of catch this here. You just can't pull it straight off. It's going to go right over the nut here. But kind of drag it across the spindle, and this will hold the bearing, and the bearing in turn will hold the seal and pull that seal right off the rotor. So now we've got everything off. Go ahead and unscrew your nut, and go ahead and take off our bearing and our seal. Okay. After we're done with that, now we can go ahead and wipe off the spindle, and we can start the inspection process. So the first thing we want to do is go ahead and wash these out. We're going to wash all this grease off, and what we need to do is turn on the wash machine. Down on your right side there's a switch. You want to pull that toggle up, and if it already is up, you want to push it down and then pull it back up again. That'll turn the pump on. Once the pump's on, we'll use this. Just go ahead and push this bronze button here, and we'll get the flow of the cleaner out. I know it looks dirty, but it actually will clean this very well. So I'm just going to scrub this lightly. Going to get out all the old grease off of this. And you don't need to spend a lot of time doing this, just to get as much of the surface grease and dirt off as you can on both of these. You want to get this one clean, and then go ahead and do this one as well. Get out as much grease as you can off of this one. Send it out with your finger. So when you're done, you should have something like that. Okay, should be nice and clean. I got some dirt on here. I can just wipe it off, but that's what it should look like. Now, we may have a problem with this bearing. Who knows? Depends on which one I put in there for you to take apart. It may be good. It may be bad. You're going to have to tell me if it's good or bad based on some charts I give you and different things. And what you see here on this part, as well as on the race, which is inside the rotor itself. So we're going to take a look at this one. All right, and this one too. All right, I want to check the rollers. I want to check the cage, make sure it's not cracked, make sure there's no pitting. I'm going to check for a few other things, make sure it spins freely. If there's any binding while I spin this, that's not a good sign either in both of these. So I want to spin this and make sure it spins nice and freely. Even if we have washed out all the grease, it should feel nice and smooth. I shouldn't feel a lot of binding up on this. Okay, so we're going to go over and check the race as well real quick, and then we will pack this and reassemble it. Okay, so here's the inside. This is called the race right here. This is where the bearing here fits in and rides along this piece of metal in here. We also want to check this for any pitting, any scoring, any hot spots, anything that would look like it was damaged. We want to just wipe this out real good and make sure that nothing in here is damaged, and we're good to put this back in. And we want to check this on this side, on the inside, as well as the outside as well. Just flip this over. See ya. And we want to wipe this out as well. get a rag and wipe that out. And we're going to look in here and make sure there's no pitting or scoring or anything like that. Once we've established that our bearings are good and our races are good, we're good to go ahead and reassemble this. Okay, now we have to actually put grease back in here before we install this. And what we're going to do is use this guy right here. This is called the grease packer. And what we're going to do is drop the shorter end or the smaller diameter end here first, right in here, right in the center. We use this tool right here to go right on top. And you got to press down on this pretty hard. And we wait until grease is just, we're watching this and wait till the grease starts coming out of the back of the cage here as we push down. And once it does that, I'll show you what it looks like. You can see we got some in the front. Now it's not coming out the sides just yet, but you can see it's all coming out the back of the cage here, and that's fine. You can rotate this around to kind of work that in. And if you have excess, that's fine. You can just put it right back in here. Not a big deal. Okay, but I want it coming out of here, and I would like it actually coming out of the rollers too. But if it doesn't, that's okay. As long as I've got enough, I know it came from the bottom all the way through the top. I'm okay with that. Okay, so when you install this, so we're going to do this for both sets, the inner and outer set, and then we'll go ahead and reinstall our rotor back onto the spindle. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is actually install our bearing back into the inner side of the rotor. So we're going to flip this over. And again, we already cleaned out the race right here, so what we're going to do is just drop this right into that space. Okay, we're going to get our seal here, and we're going to very carefully tap this in. And what I would like you to do is use a punch, something like this, and very lightly start on one end, and you just kind of work your way around the back of this. I don't want you knocking one side in all the way and then coming over here. It's going to distort the seal, and it's not going to fit in right. So again, just work your way around. Use some decent force, but you can start to feel when this is, you run your finger on this, if you got a low side or a high side, and where you might need to hit this a little bit more. So it's a little higher here. Now I'm just going to feel it with my finger, feel if it feels uniform and the same height all the way around, and then I'm good to go ahead and put this back on the spindle. Okay, so we're ready to go back on. What we're going to do is pick up our rotor and slide this on. Now that we have our inner bearing in, we're going to take our outer bearing, and again, the smaller side goes in towards the rotor. I didn't pack this one just yet. I'm just going to demonstrate how this goes back in, just so we have an idea of how this goes back together. But again, the smaller end always goes forward. It doesn't go this way where the larger end goes to the inside. The larger ends always go to the outside of the front and the back. So I'm just going to slip this in. And again, you have to grease this before we reinstall this on both the inner bearing on the inside and the outer bearing here on the outside before this goes back together. Okay. Go ahead and put our washer back on. Okay. And then we're going to put our nut back on this. Now it's a special technique for this, and you're going to need your torque wrench in order to do this. So go ahead and start this by hand first. Get this nut started on the threads by hand. Spin this in. With the correct size socket for the nut, go ahead and trim this until it's hand tight. And then we're going to set our wrench, at least for this application, and I'll give you a different torque if needed, but the first place we're going to set this is at 20 foot-pounds. Go ahead and install your socket on here, and then we're going to, as we spin this, we're going to go ahead and apply this until it clicks. One time. I don't keep clicking this because then I'm over torquing this. Okay? One click, we're good. Okay? Once we've done that, we're going to remove our socket, take your breaker bar, put that on breaker bar, and we're actually going to back this off a half a turn. So we're going to start here, wherever you want to start, 3 o'clock, back this off to 9 o'clock. Okay? Go ahead and put it back on your torque wrench, and we're going to actually dial this down to 17 pounds. Okay? And then we're going to go ahead and do the same thing again. We're going to spin this. And while we're turning this, we're going to turn this until it clicks. That's it. Again, I'm not clicking this like this and going, is it tight enough? Is it tight enough? First click, you're at 17 pounds. Okay? So we've got that set up. We're going to go ahead and put this little metal clip back on here on the nut. Now, if this little tooth sticks out over the hole here, just take it off, rotate it once. It should line up so you can put your cotter pin back through. I'll have new cotter pins for you. You never install an old cotter pin. You always want to put a new one in. So I'll have some new cotter pins in here for you. But the easiest way to do this is to feed the cotter pin through the bottom so your guys are up here. Take a pair of needle nose pliers. And you're going to bend one down this way. Just kind of push that down. If you can do it by hand, if not, just use your pliers to push it down. And the other one is going to get pushed up this way. Now, if it doesn't fit in here, you can kind of bend this down. That's fine. The idea is that this cotter pin is going to prevent this nut from moving because we don't have a lot of torque holding this in place. Again, the reason we don't have that is because we need to have room for the bearing to spin. If we make this too tight, the bearing will bind. If it's too loose, this hub will actually be too loose on the spindle. Okay, the bearings will be too loose on the spindle. Okay, so now that we've got our cotter pin back in, we're going to take our dust cap, get this in position, kind of get it on there straight. And again, we don't need a lot of force with this. We don't need to whack on this. Just give it a little tap all the way around. And it should go in nice and easy. If it's sticking on you or if it's having a problem, come get me. But you should be able to see it. So this lip right here goes nice and flat against the rotor here all the way around. Just rotate it and check it. Okay. Last thing we want to do is go ahead and reinstall our brake rotor with the bracket. So go ahead and start that by hand in the back here. And I'm going to give you some torque specs. You're also going to use the torque wrench to torque these on. I don't want you just doing it as tight as you can. That's not going to be tight enough. Because I want the next group to experience what it's like when it comes to having to loosen this. So I'm going to have you torque this down. You can use a ratchet just to kind of snug it up. That's fine. Back here. The bottom one and the top one. Okay. But after these are snug, I want you to look up, and I'll show you where to look it up, how tight these two nuts on the back side need to be. Okay. The very last step, and then this happens because we have this all greasy here. We're touching the surface of the rotor here and leaving grease on here. The last thing you want to do is leave grease on here that comes in contact with our brake pads if you are doing this for real. And so the last thing we need to do is get some degreaser on a clean rag, not an oily rag. This is good, something like this. Spray this on here, and we want to go all the way around and wipe off all the grease off the rotor. There should be no grease, but you can see all that grease that was on there. Okay, and if you still have some grease, you need to spray it again. Just spray it on your cloth here, and you're going to go around and wipe this off. You might have some room in back to wipe this off too. Just stick your finger back there. Wipe off the grease. Okay, but I shouldn't have any grease on the face of this side or the other side of the rotor. Once this is all assembled, your brakes are torqued down and this is cleaned off, then I want you to come and get me for a signature that this is complete.